So have a great day, everyone. Welcome again to another session of educational videos talking about preparation on how to become a teacher. This time we are going to talk about lesson planning. For those who would like to become a teacher, those who are in the pre-service teaching, this would really help you on preparing a lesson. For those who are not yet a professional teacher but planning to become part of the teaching profession, this discussion will really help you talking about lesson planning. So allow me to share my screen for a moment. So this time we will be talking about the introduction of lesson planning. So I'll be using this presentation from SlideShare, the lesson planning introduction. So if you can observe, no, there is stages, no, in making the lesson plan. No, there is a process, a lesson planning process. So we have here the knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So where do I want my students level learning? So in this point, we are going to discuss on that point, the levels of learnings that we want to our learners. These are what we call the taxonomy, the taxonomy of learning process. If we prepare to deliver the instruction to our learners, the lesson planning is one of the most integral part in order to deliver the instruction to our students. So what is all about lesson plan? Why there is a need of a teacher to prepare his or her lesson. Now, if an engineer has its own blueprint, now the teacher also have his own lesson plan. So lesson plan is a teacher's detailed description of the course of instruction or the learning trajectory for a lesson. So the word here is trajectory. So if we talk about a trajectory in physics, this is the target, the end point of the objectives of a certain lesson. So there are questions that we need to answer if you want to become a professional teacher facing your students in the classroom or in the online class, today's situation. So these are the things that we need to answer. In answering this question, the output will be the lesson planning. So what I am going to teach, what am I teaching? So it's in the lesson plan. The one that will answer this question will be on the lesson plan. After identifying what you are going to teach, there is a question, how will I teach? So it's on the strategy, the methods, the techniques of teaching. But when you talk about what I am teaching, this is the subject matter. This is what we call the content, the competencies that we want our students to learn, the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes, the knowledge, the skills and attitudes, or the KSA. These are all based on the competencies, based on the national standards. It is coming from the curriculum guide. Now we have the what we call, because of the pandemic, because of the new normal, those competencies are being uh, joined or being uh, consolidated. And that is what we call today the most essential learning competencies. So, unsa to, ano yung mga pinakamahalagang learning competencies that we need our learners to learn. So, what am I teaching? Next, who am I teaching? So, the type of learners that you have, their grade level, their ability, their readiness to learn. No? That's what we discuss on the principles of learning. So, who are our expected learners? What type of learners that we had? So, it's in the lesson plan. So, if it is a toddler, if it is an adult learner, of course, it will really differ. The strategies, the methods, the techniques will be different. No? What are you going to teach will also based on the difficulty, the level of difficulty, no, the strategy, Now, how are you going to teach? That's the strategy. The fourth one, how will I know if my students understand? So the level of the understanding, the level of learning while you are teaching to your students. So how are we going to measure? How are we going to assess? No? So we will also be talking about measurement of learning, assessment of learning. So by that, the lesson planning will really help you in answering these questions. So to continue, a lesson plan is the instructor's roadmap. So imagine the word is roadmap. Now, if you are an engineer, this is your blueprint. This is the plan of the building, of an infrastructure that you are going to build. No? To build. So the roadmap, meaning to say, this will serve as your guide of what the students need to learn. So in the lesson plan, there you can see of the students' need, their need of learning, and how it will be done. So it's in the strategy, the methods, or the techniques that you're going to use in order the students to acquire the needs, the need to learn, how it will be done effectively. So when it's effectively, these are the strategy, the pedagogy, the different techniques, the different activities that you will incorporate during the class time. So again, to repeat, the lesson plan is the teacher's roadmap. So do not get inside in the classroom if you are not prepared, if you don't have the plan. So, but it is a plan, it is not necessarily and strictly and vigorously be followed. There are some instances that the plan is not being exactly been followed because of some instances, because of the different type of learners that we had in the classroom, because of different constraints. It is possibly because of time constraints, because of the learning ability, the difficulty of the topic or the competencies. That is why it is not possible that it is very impossible that that all the lesson plan must be rigidly or vigorously followed. It's on this on the technique, on it's on the skill of teacher on how to work with it, that the lesson or the learning objectives may be still achieved despite of those constraints, because it's still a plan. There's no exact plan to be implemented, to be followed rigorously or clearly followed. Sometimes it will be distorted, sometimes it will not be followed because of some circumstances. But it is really important to prepare a plan once you start teaching in the classroom. No? There are some senior teachers already are telling that there's no need for me to prepare a lesson plan because I'm already equipped. I'm already knowledgeable for how many years? For 30 years that I've been teaching. I already have the knowledge. I already have the experience. That is why there's no need for me to plan. But I disagree on that point, because whatever your experience, how long that you have been into teaching, planning is very important, because when you plan, you really prepare what you expect and what are the instances. No, because if there are some circumstances, you can find ways or solution to whatever na mga instances that you don't expect. That is because of the plan. No? If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Imagine that statement. Now, I hope that you have grasped the idea. So, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. No? So it only means as simple as this, that if you don't plan, it is expected that you fail. No, you are really planning to fail. No, you are expecting to experience failure because you did not plan. So as teacher, I think every professions needs to have a plan. But in our case, as a teacher, we need to have a lesson plan. But this lesson plan was the old name. This in this time, it is always it before the lesson is very important. No, this time, the word lesson is being correlated to learning, to our learners. The main focus of the teaching and learning process are the learners. So the word lesson plan is being replaced to the word learning plan. Our main consideration is the learning of our students and not the lesson that the teacher would like to teach. So there are some changes, but of course, the lesson plan is still acceptable, no? But There are some experts in education telling that the lesson plan must be named learning plan because the primary concern of the teacher is not the lesson to deliver, but the learner's consideration, their learning. So it's always the learners. It's always the priority of the learning process and teaching process is the learning of our learners. So that is why it is called learning plan. But it's okay. Sometimes it's called daily lesson plan. There are some who also have prepared depending on the institution, depending on the school, depending on their authority that requires them. No? Of course, when you make your lesson plan, there are legal bases, there are national standards that you need to follow, there are institutional guidelines for you to follow that plan because that lesson plan is the smallest part that is the specific plan to be delivered in the classroom, but it is anchored on a large scope from the national standards, from its curriculum, from its learning competencies, to the syllabi or the syllabus, and of course to the curriculum guide, no, whatever standards are being asked and being used as the policy of the school. So there are before, if you are a newbie, you are required to make a detailed daily lesson plan. If you are an experienced teacher, a semi-detailed, and sometimes it is no longer daily because some other observation that some of the teachers are very stressed because they are always making daily lesson plan. If you are an elementary teacher having 9 to 10 subjects, meaning you are making lesson plan 10 lesson plan a day. There are some suggestions to make it more easier and not that of burden of the teacher, and it is called it is, we have the weekly plan, we have also the quarter plan, or we have also the unit plan or the learning plan by quarter, by grading period. So whatever it is, still developed by a teacher to guide the class learning. Details will vary depending on the preference of the teacher, the subject being covered, and the needs of the student. So the content of the lesson plan will differ preferably on the type of teacher that you are, the subject matter that you are going to teach, and of course, the main consideration, the type of learners that we had. So there are different definitions of a lesson plan. Here is the first one. The lesson plan is actually a plan of action. Simple, a simple definition. It's a plan of action. How your action is being planned in the classroom. It includes the working philosophy. No? We discussed already the foundation, the philosophical foundation of education, from the traditional philosophy of education to the modern philosophy of education. You can base on that, no, your philosophy of teaching. So your lesson plan uh, will be basically grounded on the philosophy that you are opting to. No? So his knowledge of educational philosophy, from the perennialism to realism, idealism, that's the traditional one. To reconstructionism, which is today we have the traditional is still being used, but as of today we have what we call the modern approach to teaching, like the constructivism, being compared to traditional one. Uh, because of the changes, the innovation of the teaching and learning process. But definitely, it's all about on the foundation of the educational philosophy of the teacher. His information about his students. Of course, we need to identify the type of learners that we had before we have the lesson plan. We need to identify the type of the learning ability of our learners because we always refer our lesson, the difficulty to the type of learners that we had in the classroom. So we need to put first the priority, the consideration always to the type of learners that we had. So we anchor our lesson plan to the type of learners and to your philosophy. To continue, if you are a teacher, your comprehension of the objectives of education later will be discussing what we call the educational objectives, how to create a learning objectives. Now, there are different individuals who propose this type of objectives. Basically, we have the three types of learning objectives or the lesson objectives. Traditionally, it is called the knowledge base or what we call the cognitive. The cognitive is on the mind. We have the affective domain. Now, there are three domains. We have the knowledge or what we call the cognitive base or the cognitive domain. We also have the affective domain, which involves emotions, feelings, attitudes, and values. And the third one is what we call the psychomotor domain. No? We have different classification or what we call taxonomy of educational objectives. Later, we will talk about on that so that we can start the details of the lesson plan. So to continue, as teacher, these are the things that you need to consider. Your knowledge of the material to be taught, no? The subject matter. So for example, if the subject matter is difficult, you need to adjust on the type of learners that you have. This type of subject matter is not of that very difficult, so you can adjust also. And another one is the ability, your ability as a teacher to utilize effective methods, your techniques, your strategy, or what we call the pedagogy of teaching, the strategy, how to strategize, how to elicit the interest of our learners, no? Especially the young ones, the elementary pupils, the high school students. Now, they have very short span of attention. That is one of the greatest challenge that being a teacher. So that is why you need to plan your activities, your lessons, so that they will not get bored, so that their attention will be adhere on the lesson, so that the learners will be interested in the discussion, the activities that this teacher is preparing. So that is very crucial because when you cannot get their attention, your lesson will not be that successful. Okay, another definition. The lesson plan is the title given to a statement of the achievements to be realized and specific meaning by which these are to be attained. So result oriented. The lesson plan is we are creating this and we are foreseeing the result of the teaching and learning process. How to attain the objectives. No, what are the objectives of your lessons? What do you want our learners to learn? How are you going to teach? So we will go always back to those four questions that we had in the first part. So the lesson plan will answer those questions. So it is impossible to go inside the classroom, but others are telling us that classroom, that teaching is in teaching. There's no need for us to prepare a lesson plan because we are already a seasoned teacher. But that is not a good practice. Although you are already a seasoned teacher, there is a need for you to prepare the lesson, and that's the lesson plan. Okay. Lesson planning is an important part of daily teaching plan. It only means that we need to have our basic weapon. As teacher, this is our weapon. Now, if we are engaging in a war, you need to plan, strategize. Now, there's what we call the art of war by Lao Tzu. No, Sanchu, by the way. But actually, if you are a teacher, if you become a teacher, no, it's if you are a newbie teacher, you're really preparing this one. The lesson plan is updated. But when you become a seasoned teacher, I hope that it will not happen to you, that you will no longer prepare the lesson because you are very dependent of yourself and you are very confident that you can plan the lesson on the day of the class. And that is not a good practice. Although you are already a seasoned teacher, you must have a great lesson plan. The origin of the lesson plan is from the Gestalt theory of learning. So when I say Gestalt, it's a pattern. No, if you still remember your psychology, the Gestalt psychology is all about the wholeness, the pattern, the sequence of learning. We could have another session on that, on the Gestalt theory of learning. So here it is. According to Gestalt theory, the whole is perceived by part. No? So from being a single to a part to a whole. The whole in terms of teaching refers to the subject planning. So that's the whole. And the part refers to the lesson plan. So in the lesson plan, there are sub parts. So it really correlate on the top on the theory of the Gestalt psychology of learning. Both are interrelated to each other. The lesson plan contains a brief outlines of main subject of the lesson. So if you haven't seen a lesson plan, it is just an outline of the teaching and learning process. It's just a brief outline, although if it, or even it is a detailed one or a semi-detailed one. The lesson plan focuses on the aims. What are your aims of your lessons, of the learning of our students? What are your purposes? So there in the lesson plan, these are the things that we need to consider. These are the things that I need to see if I am seeing your lesson plan. There it is. There must be reflected the aims of your lesson, the purpose of the lesson, the resources that you're going to use. This is what they call the instructional materials, or also known as learning materials, or IM. No, definitely it is just being called as an IM. No? Where is your IM? The visual aids. No, before it is called the visual aids. So because most of our learners are audio visual learners, they are visual learners. They want something to see in the presentation so that they will learn. So you must be resourceful as a teacher when it comes to your preparation of your instructional materials, or what we call the learning materials to be used in the delivery of the lessons. Another thing that we can see in the lesson plan is your learning methods, or teaching and learning methods. Methods of teaching learning, the arrangement of subject matter, from difficult to easy, easy to difficult, from a whole to a part, part to whole. So we have what we call the deductive method to inductive method. When they say deductive, no, it's in the philosophy and the logic. No, when they say deductive, the word deductive from the whole, from general to specific, that is deductive. When we talk about inductive method, from simple to complex, from simple to complex, no. So meaning inductive from part to whole. Okay, most teachers are using the inductive method. No? Uh, I think most of the lesson plan are using the inductive method from simple to complex. Now, I could also observe depending on the subject matter, there are some also using the deductive method from whole to from difficult to from complex to simple. But usually and basically, most of the lesson plan, especially within the basic education, preschool, elementary to high school, of course, they are that is the foundation of their learning. We are always using, or most of the time, we are using the inductive. So the one that I am showing to you later will be an inductive type of lesson plan. Another thing that we can observe, aside from the arrangement of the subject matter and the content, is also the plan of evaluation. How to evaluate, how to measure, how to assess. Because these are the three important terms when it comes to the learning of our student. We need to differentiate measurement, evaluation, and assessment. So how do those three terms being differed? No? What are the differentiation? How these three differs? The measurement, assessment, and evaluation. Because most of the student teachers or the education students may have some confusion of the three important terms when it comes to the learning of the students: the measurement of learning, the evaluation of learning, and the assessment of learning. So lesson planning must be done in advance, of course, because it's a plan. No? It's never a plan when you create that one on the day of of the teaching and learning process. Even an experienced, as I said earlier, even an experienced teacher must take note of what he or she is going to teach. No, it is not a guarantee that you are a seasoned and experienced teacher. You are not required. You are not obliged to make a lesson plan. No, even an experienced teacher must take note of what he or she is going to teach in the class and how he is to proceed with the lesson. So it is very important weapon, no? It is not a guarantee again that you are an experienced teacher, you are exempted to make a lesson plan because every teacher lesson plan is part of your life. So there are some criteria to tell us that this lesson plan is good or satisfactory or exemplary. A good lesson plan spells out clearly what has already been taught, in what direction, and what the teacher intends to do, what will be the rule of the pupil, and rule of the pupil activities that are to be pursued. So those are the criteria to consider that your lesson plan is a good lesson plan. Another thing, a good lesson plan is one in which there are clear, precise statements of the aims. So there we can see the objectives, the purpose of the lesson, and techniques to be employed by the teacher. So it must be clear, precise. A lesson plan directs the daily work towards over the goals of the course or the subject. So what is the main goal of the subject? So by that, the lesson plan will help you to direct to achieve that goals of that subject. Daily lesson plan guides the teacher in his teaching. So, nature of lesson plan. The following are the nature of the lesson plan. Number one, it is an experience in anticipatory teaching. When you say anticipatory, you are anticipating what will be the next step, what will happen to the teaching and learning process. So if you have the plan, you can really expect, you can really anticipate of what will be the next step, what will be the possible possibilities on every scenario in the teaching and learning process. Another thing, a teacher's mental and emotional visualization of teaching activity. So he can or she can visualize of what will he expecting to happen in the lesson, in the teaching and learning process. So when you prepare a lesson plan, you can really foresee, especially when you identify the type of learners that you had. It is so different when you go inside directly in the classroom without the lesson plan because you cannot anticipate. You know, as a teacher, experienced in anticipatory teaching, you need to be anticipate of what will happen on the next because of that preparation of your lesson. The third one, based on operational philosophy of the teacher, it will always be the guiding principle of the teacher, ang kanyang philosophy of choice of teaching. Another thing, it requires a teacher's understanding of the learner. So when you prepare your lesson plan, make always a consideration of the type of learners that you had. Paulit-ulit kong sinasabi ito dahil your lesson plan will always depend on the type of learners that you will have. You need to adjust if these are the type of learners that you have. Number 5, influenced by the level of knowledge of subject by the teacher. So it is very difficult to teach a subject which is not in your expertise. But when you are deployed in the real battle of teaching, you may be probably given a subject matter which is not in your expertise. But you don't have a choice. Your choice is to study again and prepare for that. And that is why the lesson plan is needed. Number 6, as I mentioned, it is a blueprint, a guide map, a roadmap of action for teaching and process. So it is so difficult when you enter the classroom, when you enter a lesson, when you start a lesson without your plan. But there's no need for you to read the lesson plan. That will always be as a guide only. It will only serve as a guide. There's no need for you to memorize the lesson plan because the plan is always a guide. There is no need for you to memorize the lesson plan into word by word because if you will do that, no, you cannot really achieve the aim of your lesson. That is only a guide. When you craft, when you make that one, of course, you are knowledgeable of your plan. If you are the one who make the plan, it only means that you are preparing on that and you are expecting that plan to happen. And if you are not the one who make that plans, of course, it is very impossible for you to predict, to anticipate of what are the things that will occur in the teaching and learning process. Number 7, the number 7 nature of lesson plan is a flexible one. So when I say flexible, it's not rigid. No, the lesson plan is not rigidly followed. Sometimes it will be distorted. Sometimes it will not follow because of some instances and circumstances. But it is always systematic in approach for teaching the knowledge, the skills, the attitude of our learners. Number eight, it is organized in two phases of reactive and post-active. When I say reactive, you are planning that these students are expecting to answer this one. No, that is what we call the students' response. No, post-active after the activity, after the assessment that you will be given, what will happen? How are you going to evaluate if the learners are learning? So those are the eight based on the presentation as the nature of lesson plan. So how can we say that a lesson plan is successful, addresses and integrates these three components as follows? Objectives for student learning. So that's the number one. When you craft the lesson plan, your lesson plan, we always consider on how to achieve the objectives, the learning objectives for our student learning. When we plan our lesson, it is not on how we deliver, on how we are fluent, how we are so that of expert. Yes, it is needed, but the number one concern of us is the objectives for student learning. The second one is the teaching and learning activities, how to prepare different activities in the classes, in the delivery of lessons, so that everybody will be interactive, participative, and the students are involved and engaged. The third one, strategies to check student understanding. In the middle of the discussion, usually we check, no, we check the level of understanding. We integrate activities. We have the checking of level of understanding of our students through the different activities that we prepare. If we can still proceed or not, because there are some students or not yet, not do not understand yet on that kind of the activity. So there is a regular checking of student understanding. So now we have the purpose or the importance of lesson plan. Why there is a need for us to prepare our lesson. What's the purpose of having the lesson plan? A lesson plan is a detailed description of the course of instruction by a teacher designed for an individual lesson. Meaning to say, how are we going to deliver the curriculum that was being crafted by the different experts in the national level, the national standards? So the lesson plan will be the one to uh, escalate, no? From the national, if I escalate down to the learners. So the lesson plan will serve as the last resort of the curriculum, the implementation of the curriculum. Meaning to say, the teachers are also called the curriculum designer due to the lesson plan that he or she is preparing. It gives a teacher greater confidence, self-reliance in handling a lesson. So if you try to observe a teacher who is not prepared, that teacher did not make a plan. When you get inside in the classroom, not to avoid those scenarios when a teacher is just giving their life stories, giving their own personal experiences, and that's one of the indication that the teacher is not prepared. The teacher did not prepare a plan because he's going to teach you or going to share you something which is not part of his plan. No. Second one, specifies objectives of the day's work. So, what is our main objectives of this lesson of today's topic? It also helps you to track on the progress of teaching. As I said, there is no need for you to memorize the sequence of the lesson plan. There is no need for you to be aware to be afraid that the lesson will not be followed rigorously because the lesson is flexible. It will always depend on the type of learners that we have. So the lesson plan will just help us to track on the progress of the teaching and learning process. It helps in organizing the classroom activities. So when you are going to give the first activity, the second activity, the third one, so it's in the plan. So by that lesson plan, it will help you to organize the classroom activities. Now, when you are going to give the first activity, why the second activity must be given after this one and after that. That is because of the organization of your classroom activities, which is indicated in your lesson plan. Another thing, it offers reasoning, imagination. There, if you are a curriculum planner, no, because a teacher is also a curriculum planner, you think your imagination is in the highest point because you are preparing a lesson plan. It will also guide you in decision making, on why there is a need to make this kind of activity and this type of learners that I had, why there is a need for me to give this kind of activity on this point, and why not it is why this activity should not be given first before this. So it will help you in making decision in the teaching and learning process. And it also helps in the continuity of an education process. So by the next time that you will have your other competency, other lessons, other content, so you will base also on the previous lessons that you prepare. The lesson plan serves in the evaluation of the teaching rendered. So after also your teaching, you can also reflect on the lessons that you prepare, the lesson that you deliver. You can evaluate yourself if you really achieve or attain the lesson objectives of your lesson. Next one, it encourages the learners to learn as the contents are systematically presented. That is due to the lesson plan, the topics, the subject matters being arranged and organized by the teacher. It also provides guidelines for the teachers in the teaching and learning, facilitates micro teaching, helps in the choose of or selection of subject matter, procedures, and planning. It also serves as check on unplanned curriculum. It provides framework to keep teaching along with the lines of the syllabus or the curriculum. So alignment. It also helps the teacher to systematize the learning process. It makes the teaching and learning process well knit, interconnected, and associated. So let's proceed now to the essentials of a lesson plan. A good lesson plan should have the following characteristics. So, what are the characteristics, essentials of a lesson plan? Number one, it should be written form. So, of course, it's not a verbal one because it's a plan. It should have a clear stated general and specific objectives to be attained. For example, uh, at the end of the 60-minute discussion, 75 or 80% of the learners will be able to, but when I talk about able to, these are the specific objectives. To identify the different parts of the human body. That's the specific objectives. And when I say to identify, later I'll be presenting the different taxonomy, different verb to be used in conducting or crafting a specific objectives that we need to attain. So when it is a cognitive, for example, to identify, to define, so that's identification. That's for the cognitive one. A good for affective. So that involves affection. That's involve feelings, no, values. No? For example, to appreciate the goodness, the importance of that. So that's an example of an affective. When you talk about psychomotor, it's the movement, no? To draw, to illustrate, to perform. Those are example of specific objectives. A good lesson plan has linked with the previous knowledge of the learner. So, as teacher, we need to elicit the previous or the prior knowledge or the schema of the learner. So, when we craft the lesson plan, we need also to get back on the track of the type of learners that we had, and of course the previous knowledge, the stock knowledge. So what is their previous knowledge on the topic that I'm going to discuss? So you need to identify that one, know how it is correlated, the link with the previous discussion, previous knowledge that we had in the previous years and previous level. We need also to consider on that in making the lesson plan. The lesson plan should clearly state the teaching and learning activities. There, we can see the teaching activity, teacher's activity on the left, on the right side is students or the learner's activity. The lesson plan should cover the entire subject subjected matter. So what is the subjected matter? Meaning to say what will be the content of the lesson that is intended to be taught by the teacher. For example, for this day, we are going to teach the different parts of the human body. So that's the subjective matter that we intended to teach during on our plan. So we will make sure what are the things that we need to attain. What are our objectives? Example, to identify the different parts, to appreciate the human body parts, to illustrate, to draw the different human body parts. For example, those are the three domain: the cognitive, psychomotor, and the affective domain. To continue, the lesson plan should follow the maxim of teaching. The lesson plan should include the instructional aids, or what we call the visual aids, the audiovisual presentation, the instructional learning materials, or the IMs, or the learning materials that we are going to use. For example, if you are using a video presentation about the different parts of human body, a YouTube video presentation, that's part of your instructional aid, or what we call the instructional materials. A good lesson plan contains an organized subject matter and the materials for instruction. So, what are the teaching materials that they are going to use? Definitely, before it is called teaching materials, but now it's the term that's being used today is learning materials, because our primary concern are the learners and not the teacher. Before it is called teaching materials, because that is a material being used by teacher. But the main point there is our learners. So instead of using the word teaching material or materials, we need to use the what we call the okay. To continue, it should have an app or framework for teaching. So we have here what we call an acronym to serve as a guide in the word lesson plan. So let's start with letter L, link previous knowledge. Now, it was been mentioned earlier, so we need to consider the previous knowledge of our learners in crafting our lesson. So that's what we call the previous knowledge, the schema, the stock knowledge of the learners on this topic that we are going to teach. So we need also to consider the previous knowledge that they had. Letter E, ensure definite assignment. So there is an assignment, the last part of the lesson. Later, you will witness the different parts of the lesson, a sample lesson plan. We are using the inductive lesson plan from simple to complex, from specific to general. Letter S, first S is systemized learning process. Another letter S is summarization. Letter O, overcome nervousness and anxiety. That's a good point, no? Because when you have the plan, no, if you are a beginner, especially if you are a newbie of the teaching profession, you might be experiencing nervousness and anxiety once you face your students. But if you prepare the lesson plan, you can overcome the nervousness and anxiety because you are guided. Letter N, new learning introduction. Letter P, it prevents from wandering away from the subject matter. So if you have the plan, you can concentrate and focus on the subject matter. Because if you don't have the lesson plan, you probably go to other lessons. You go to other subject matter. You go to other point, which is not part of the plan because you don't have the plan. So to avoid and prevent that from wandering from one subject matter to another subject matter, the lesson plan is needed. Letter L, learning by exercise, practice and revision. So, of course, when you plan the lesson, of course, you let your students do the performance. You know, let be students must be active, participative, engaged, and involved in the learning process. Letter A, assignment and availability of adequate materials for the lesson. So we need to also to consider the learning materials, instructional materials, that is what we call, or the teaching materials. Letter N, new and clear ideas because of the lesson plan. So at the end of the class, every teacher teaches three lessons. The first one, the one we plan to teach, the one we actually teach, the one we wish we had taught. So on this point, now I would like you to make your understanding of what is all about lesson plan, the importance and the function of lesson plan. So to continue, I will be presenting here the general objectives, formulation of educational objectives. So by making your lesson, this is very important. No, when we have our lesson, the first thing that comes to our mind is our objective. What is our educational objectives? Where we anchored our lesson objectives. So the meaning of educational objectives. Educational objectives are the results sought by the learners. So these are the things that our learners needed to learn. The learner expected to learn. The educational program that is what the student should be able to do. So what are the students expected to do? At the end of the learning period, at the end of the 60-minute, 1 hour, 1.5 hour, 2 hours, whatever is the time period of the teaching and learning process, the students are expecting these educational objectives to be attained. That is because of the help of the teacher through the crafting of the educational objectives in his or her lesson plan. Okay? Characteristics of educational objectives. Of course, when we create a plan, an objective, it must be smart. No, smarter. No, there are other innovation on that. No, from the acronym SMART, it will become more detailed and complex. We have the smarter, but for this time, the well stated objective should be smart and focused. No, there are two terms being used as an acronym. The objectives of your lesson or your lesson plan must be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bounded. Okay, that's SMART. Another term is focused, feasible, observable. When I say feasible, it's possibility. No? Is it possible to happen? Observable, centered on student. So it must be student centered. No? Sequentially appropriate, the sequence of the subject matter or the lesson. Ever relevant, no? The topic, the lesson must be relevant. And letter D, developmentally appropriate. So the development of the learners must be appropriate to their levels. So again, the characteristic of educational objectives must be well-stated objective that must be smart and focused. So types of educational objectives according to the level of objectives. General instructional objectives. We have intermediate objectives, the instructional objectives, or specific objectives. So when I say general or instructional objectives, so this is more complex. General, intermediate, in between, and instructional objectives are the specific objectives. Um, these are the taxonomy of educational objectives. These are your guides when you create the lesson objectives in your lesson plan. I think I have mentioned this earlier. the cognitive, affective, and the psychomotor domain. So there are three requirements in crafting your lesson plan learning objectives. This should be based on the three types of taxonomy or domain. When I say taxonomy, the objectives are being classified, educational taxonomy, no? Classification of learning objectives. So there are cognitive objectives, there are affective, there are psychomotor. So we will consider these three in making your objectives. So what is this taxonomy of educational objectives? The taxonomy for educational objectives are objective points out that they are concerned with the intended behavior. So when we talk about learning, what are the intended behavior after the students are being engaged to the teaching and learning process? So what we are expecting to our students after na ma-learn na nila ang isa ka subject matter, their intended behavior or the behavior to be learned. So there are three learning behaviors. This is not about their usual behavior, but it's all about the learning behavior. From cognitive, it's all about the knowledge. Affective, this is all about the emotion. So triangle na siya. We have cognitive or the knowledge base. We have the affective or the values. We have also the psychomotor or the actions or the skills. The taxonomy of educational objectives is proposed. The proponent of this is Benjamin Bloom's. Benjamin Bloom. Bloom's taxonomy divided educational objectives in three domains. I repeat, there are three educational objectives, three domains. As I always state, cognitive, it's all about the knowledge, the 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 mind, the affective, the emotions, the values, psychomotor are the actions, no, the skills. So let's start with the cognitive. So the knowledge base. The aspect of cognitive domain resolve around the comprehension, critical thinking on a particular topic. This domain focuses on thinking skills. So it's all about the mind. Traditional education tends to emphasize on skills in this domain, particularly lower order objectives. So the cognitive domain is a lower order objectives. These are there are six levels in the cognitive domain, moving from lowest order to process to the highest one. So if you try to look at this, these are the taxonomy of educational objectives. The first one being discussed is the cognitive. These are the level of the cognitive domain. The lower one is the knowledge. Next to that is the comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So when we assess students, when we make questions also in our test or examination, we always base the type of exam, the type of test that we are going to give to our students based on the domain of the educational objectives, the cognitive. Even in the level of the cognitive, there are six levels from knowledge. Okay, to continue. So we have the knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So from simple, of course, the simple one is the knowledge one. So knowledge, just identifying, recalling information, no? Identify what are the body parts. So identify the parts of the body. So that's knowledge. When I say comprehension, so it's a higher degree. You need to comprehend, no? Understanding. Application, it's more higher than the knowledge and comprehension, know how to apply the learning into a real life situation. The fourth one is the analysis, so analyze the situation giving on the topic. The fifth one is the synthesis. When I say synthesis, is it's consolidation of the different information. And the last one is the judgment or the evaluation. So the higher the degree, the when we talk about this cognitive level, there are different stages. So these are example of cognitive domain verb to be used, action verb when you craft a objective number one. Of course, the objective number one will always be the cognitive. But in the cognitive, there are higher level. No, it will depend on the type of learners that you have. For example, if it is knowledge, no, when I talk about that, if we are talking about knowledge, this is a very simple one. No, knowledge, uh, simple action verb. So we go back here like count, define, describe, draw. So this is what we expect to our student when we have our lesson. No, for example, count 1 to 10. So that's a very simple objective because that's only knowledge. If you try to look at this when it is in the comprehension, the verb that being used is higher, no? Like associate. So if it compare that one to count, here it's compute. So it's a higher degree. So that's only for the knowledge, for the cognitive panin ng mga word. So application like add, so like arrange for analysis, for synthesis, combine, and for evaluation, assess. So I think the subject matter on this, you can really identify this is all about numbers, no? Addition, mathematics. So simple as that, no? So if you try to check on this, from count to knowledge, when it comes to comprehension, compute. So the degree becomes higher. But that is only for the cognitive because it involves the critical thinking, the use of our mind. It is different from the affective domain. Later, no, when I say affective, it's all about the emotions. Again, we can have this one. You can have this copy. This will serve you as your guide in crafting your first objective, the cognitive objective, depending on the level of the cognitive domain. But these are your guide. This will really help you. So let's proceed now to the affective domain. This domain aspects, the aspects in the affective domain describe the way people react emotionally. So meaning to say, on this part, it involves the emotions, react emotionally. So when I talk about affective domain, it gives you the reaction of your emotions, the ability to feel another thing's pain or joy. So it is all about emotions. Another one, affective objectives typically target the awareness and growth in attitude, emotions, motivations, and feelings. There are 5 levels. Earlier, in the cognitive, we have 6 levels. Here in affective, we have 5 levels in the affective domain. Receiving an emotion, responding, how to respond in the emotions or feelings, how to valuing, organization, how to organize the emotions that you have, and of course to characterize the emotions, the feelings. So, to repeat, these are the levels of affective domain. There are also suggested action verb that we'll be using when we craft the objectives. Later, we will analyze, no, the type of objectives that we are going to see when we have our lesson plan. So when it is receiving, acknowledge or listen, observe. When we respond, if you try to look at this one, these are action verb that refers to responding to us emotions or feelings. But when we talk about valuing, so we have adopt, care, contribute. So these are the first words, no? For example, contribute the emotions, no? Then when we say organizing, like facilitate, investigate, manage, that kind of emotions or feelings. The higher one is the characterization. It's all about act, administer, advance, advocate. So higher degree of the affective domain. Okay, but this is all given, no? These are your guide in making your affective domain learning objectives. The last domain is psychomotor. From the word psychomotor, when you say motor, it's an action. No? Describe about obtaining the skills. So when I talk about psychomotor domain, it really involves the skills, abilities to carry out physical tasks, for example, to draw, illustrate. But there are still domains, levels on this domain. No, psychomotor objectives usually focus on expected changes in the skills of an individual. So in this type, we have seven. We have seven levels of psychomotor domain. So on this part, simple, perception, set, guided response, mechanism, complex overt response, adaptation. We have adaptation and the organization. So let us try to look at the example of action verb on the different levels. Definitely, these are all psychomotor domain learning objectives, action verbs like frame, connect, correct, design. We have also draw. These are basic, no? Construct, shake, torn, trim. Basta it involves skills. So we are done with the lesson planning, no? But I would like to use another presentation for you to have more information about lesson planning. So lesson planning is an important activity of daily teaching. As I said in the previous discussion, it is really needed. The lesson plan might include the main points to be covered in the lesson activities. When I talk about the main points in lesson covered activities, these are the subject matter. The students to do. These are what we expect to our students. These are the learning objectives. Question related to the topic. So possibly are the activities or the assessment. Realization, stipulated instructional objectives. So how to realize how the students perform in the lesson. The lesson planning is the heart of effective teaching. Now, you cannot be an effective teacher if you don't have the lesson plan. You could not achieve effective teaching and learning process if there is no lesson plan. No lesson plan, no effective teaching. So that is a correlation. We have defined earlier the lesson plan different definition. We will skip on this. The functions, we also give this one. The importance, essential, I think we are done. But on this part, steps on the lesson planning. It's a cyclical method. When I say cyclical, cycle from preparation or introduction to presentation. Then we have the association or the comparison, then generalization, application. Then before you end, you need to recapitulate, review the things that you have discussed. Then another lesson, prepare again. So it is a never-ending cycle. So I will not discuss on this part the format of the lesson plan because there are different format. I will be presenting you the St. Michael College of Caraga Teacher Education sample format of lesson plan. So we will be contextualizing the sample lesson plan that I am going to present this time. Okay, for a moment. So this time I have here, let us analyze this sample lesson plan. This is how lesson plan look like. So this is this lesson plan is coming from a lesson plan from a unit earner student of mine before when I was teaching a unit earner. So the unit earners are already professional. They are aiming to become professional teacher. So I have to teach them on how to prepare the lesson plan. And I am glad that they were able to make this one, meaning to say they have learned something from the teaching principles of teaching. So if you try to look at this lesson plan, there are parts. The first one is the objective. Second one, the subject matter. So, what's in the objective? So, ako lang sang isa-isahon, no? After the subject matter, we have the procedure. There are three, this is the third part. So, in the third procedure, you can see there is what we call teacher's activity. On the left side, student's activity. There, we have the presentation, no? We have three phases of learning on the lesson plan. We have the initiatory phase, the introduction, initiatory. Under the initiatory, there are different parts. We have under the procedure, we have the first one, the initiatory phase. We have the review. No, we are considering the previous knowledge, then presenting the new lesson. Under the new lesson, we have the motivation. But probably you can look another type of lesson plan. It will depend on the type of institution that we had, that you had. But in this case, I am using this format. Then after that, after the motivation, under the new lesson, we have the unlocking of difficulties, so a vocabulary. Then after that, we have the discussion. Then under discussion, so everything that being discussed by the teacher there, we can expect that students are also reacting. They are reactive on that point. Then after after discussion, we have the generalization. No, so meaning inductive. We are using the inductive because it's from simple to complex, from specific to general. Then after the generalization, we have the application. Then the fourth part is the evaluation. So this is how we evaluate the learning if they have learned something. And the last part is assignment. Therefore, there are five parts. So to repeat, the first part is the objectives. Second part is the subject matter. The third part is procedure. The fourth part is the evaluation. And the last part is assignment. But it will really differ from different institution. But in my case, I am using this one. This is a science subject. So I am also expecting you to make your own lesson plan based on this. No, I am not expecting that you can craft a well-crafted lesson plan, but I am hoping that you can create your own based on the example given. So we only focus on this discussion first on the crafting of objectives. Because if the objective is not crafted well, the entire lesson will not be successful. So the crucial part of the lesson plan is the crafting of objectives. Because the entire lesson will always be dependent on the learning objectives. So meaning to say, kapag hindi maayos ang paggagawa ng objectives, the rest, we cannot continue it anymore. The traditional learning plan making of lesson plan, it is a cursive one. No, you need to write this one in an intermediate paper. No, you write all of these things. No, then after all you finish it, then you will let your critic teacher to criticize your work, and if it is wrong, you can rewrite it again. That the critic teacher will just write the word rewrite. So although there are some parts already not being corrected, but you need to still rewrite again from the top. So that is a very crucial. The first thing that we need to check as a critic teacher, cooperating teacher, is your objectives. So if the objective is not properly and appropriately created, of course, we can no longer check the rest of the topics, the rest of the parts of the lesson plan. That is why the objectives is very crucial part of lesson plan. You have to be reminded that when you craft the learning objectives, there are three domains to be considered. Again, to repeat, if you still remember, we have the cognitive one. That's the first one. It must be arranged systematically. Then we have the affective. And the third one is the psychomotor. Let us try to check the levels of the domain and its levels. In this case, this is the general objectives. We need to have 75% of level of proficiency of all students in this class, Science 7. And 1, 2, 3 are the specific objectives. So identify, the word identify, if you go back to our verbs in crafting the learning objectives, that is part of the cognitive. No? So try to look at this one. So identify, probably it is part there. We have identify. So the word identify is being used here, and that is responding for affective. No? Here. The word identify is also used in the cognitive, but it will depend on how the word identify is being used in the objective. So in this case, identify the different ecological relationship found in the ecosystem, it is cognitive. So the second one, because it's appreciate, it involves affective, appreciate the importance of ecological relationship. And the third one is draw. So meaning to say, it's a psychomotor. So we will just focus first on the objectives. So I will let you create your three objectives. You can choose your own. We will just end on this topic, objectives. I will elaborately discuss on other session on some other parts. I will ask you to create your three objectives. You can choose your own lesson, subject matter, because on on part two, the topic there is ecological relationship. The reference is the book that being used. The materials being used in this lesson plan is visual aids, pictures, activity sheets, cards, values integration, and cooperation. So later we will discuss on that. But focus only on the objectives. So you try your best to create your own objectives. But before that, you cannot create your objectives if you don't have the subject matter. The subject matter on this point is the ecological relationship. You might choose your own subject matter and create your own objectives based on the cognitive domain, affective, and psychomotor. And we will criticize and analyze your own learning objectives. So I think we will end up on this discussion. I hope that you have learned something from this one, from the learning objectives, educational objectives, uh, taxonomy of learning objectives, to the lesson plan, to its objectives, to its function, to its characteristics, to its importance. So by next discussion, now we will be talking about on some details of the learning plan. So let's call it a day. Thank you so much for you for listening and for your attendance for this afternoon. Thank you so much. Keep safe and God bless everyone.